you need is one teacher. All you need is two teachers who are white supremacists. Like, why are you teaching in the first place? Oh, you're teaching people how to join the Ku Klux Klan or something. You know, why are you there? Yeah.
Welcome back, Flipboard fam. This is your favorite coach, Coach Jeffrey, and I'm back with another amazing guest. I have Miss Simma Lieberman. Welcome to the show.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here.
Thank you for coming. Tell our listening audience a little bit about yourself.
I'm from the Bronx. I live in Berkeley, California now. I've been here for a long time. For work, work is also like my passion in my life. I'm a consultant. I'm a consultant and facilitator and speaker and author on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I focus a lot on inclusive leadership, how leaders can be more inclusive and ensure that everybody does their best work. And I am also the host and producer of a podcast on race. It's a cross-race conversation on race, and it's called Everyday Conversations on Race for Everyday People. And that's what it is. It's a cross-race conversation, everyday conversations on race. You know, we try not to get too academic and too theoretical, but to have those kind of conversations that everybody can actually relate to.
Wow, that's amazing. And I'm going to dig into that and start. So why do you feel it's important to have an everyday conversation about?
I think if we don't, then we're doomed, number one. But I've always felt like it was really, well, for me personally, it was always very important because I grew up around people from all different races and all different backgrounds. And I was always really curious about people. First of all, I'm Jewish, and I grew up, wasn't that too much later than the Holocaust. And I remember one time when I was 8 years old, these white kids, they attacked our synagogue, and it was really scary to me. I remember thinking, they threw a brick through the window, and they were calling us names, but I was only 8. And I remember thinking, how could they hate us so much? They don't even know us. And then I decided, I was really young, but I decided I want to get to know people who are different than me so they won't be afraid of me or hate me. And I want them to get to know me. And so that's how I lived my life. And I also knew that my safety as a Jewish person was going to be by working together and being around other people who had been targets of hate and discrimination. So that's why it was important to me. And why it's important to me in the United States. You know, people try to act, oh, it's so divided. It's never been more divided. Come on. Yeah, it's not that it's never more. What was segregation? Divided. That's people want to tell themselves the story they tell themselves is, oh, we're all living right together. It was so great. And then boom, something happened. And then that's what made everybody divided. No, we've always had a lot of divisions in this country. And in fact, something like 75% of white people don't really know people of color. They don't really know people who are different than them. And we're all living in this country together. And if you have discrimination and you have exclusion, that means that a lot of people aren't able to do their best work. So maybe you're discriminating against, or maybe you're not hiring somebody who could find the cure for cancer or find the cure for COVID or something like that. And for me, I don't want to live somewhere where I'm not talking to my neighbors or they're not talking to me. But I just really think I think it's important because, for one thing, living in an all-white country would be really boring to me. But the other thing is that I have all different friends, and I would have like different people who call me and say, "Hey, this happened. Is this racist? Oh, this is racist." And all these people would call me, and I think I need to bring people together. And also, I wasn't really seeing a lot of my friends. So I thought if I bring people together and I have a podcast, then I'll invite my friends on.
Yeah.
And then after a while, people also start seeing the importance of it. People started hearing about it. And now I get calls from PR people and other people like that saying, could be on your podcast. It's really important. Mm-hmm. And for me, I think if I could stop one white person from calling the police on one Black person because of my podcast, I've saved a life.
Wow.
And I really think it is, even though I joke around, I mean, it's life or death. And I think that it has gotten worse because, number one, the police have more arms than they did before. If you look at a lot of the police that are killing unarmed Black and brown people, a lot of them are young, like they've been in the military or they've been militarized, and
Mhm.
that's what they know to do. And they don't see a lot of them don't see people of color as human beings. Actually, they see themselves as like the occupying force, and we need to do something about that, or it's just gonna get worse. And then you have like white citizens who think they that it's their responsibility to arrest a black person for driving a nice car. These are things that have happened to like for friends of mine.
Yeah.
And we got to, and so we have to do something. We have to do something about this. So for me, that's another reason why this is really important. And when my son was little, I just said, I just want him to grow up in a world where people aren't afraid of him because of who he is. And he's
Mhm.
not afraid of other people because of who they are. And also, I have an interracial family.
Mhm.
So there's so many reasons, but as a nation, as a world, it's really important. We got to stop hate. We have to spread love across the globe. And it doesn't happen when people don't know each other.
Yes. I want to start with the leadership part because one of the least diverse areas in America is the leadership in the school and educations. I think 85% of school leaders are white or Caucasian, and it's an eye-opening thing to go to a conference and to find sometimes another person of color, whether that person be Muslim or a background or of anybody or another black person or whatever. How can school districts diversify their culture meaningfully?
I was just actually on a clubhouse discussion this morning about that. It's funny. Number one, you have to start. Actually, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. But here's one: you have to recruit people who are not white. And a lot of times, like white people just recruit other white people. I mean, research has shown that recruiters tend to want to hire and recruit people who just look like them because they're more comfortable. Oh, you went to my school. Oh, you grew up in the same white neighborhood I did. Oh, you went to Princeton, or whatever it is. But we need to absolutely have more teachers of color, more non-white teachers everywhere. And in order to do that, you also have to pay people more because a lot of people of color are going to, if they choose to be a teacher, like work in a private school if they're going to be paid more money. So they need to pay people more money. There needs to be more recognition. And also, like, people need to be educated on every level. So if you have all these white people who hire other white people, they need to be educated. They need to see the importance, or you need to get rid of some of them, really. When you have in your state, when you have a governor who's making it illegal to talk about race, what is that about? When I was in elementary school, my school was almost all white. I mean, almost all white. It was almost all Jewish. It was about maybe 94% or something like that, and maybe 2% black. And not until I went to junior high school then it was a big mixture. But the teachers still, and they were not progressive, but when they taught American history, here's what we learned. We learned about the Holocaust. We learned about slavery. We learned about segregation. We learned about freedom riders. We learned about Harriet Tubman. When I was 8, Harriet Tubman was my idol because they called her the Black Moses, and I was Jewish, and it was the Holocaust and helping people escape.
Yeah.
So we learned that. I don't know why, for some reason, somehow we learned that connection. And I think that it's really that we have to start learning those connections. And also, here's one of my concerns about how do we get more people of color, like helping to run these schools. I think that the white people who are running them, they're just fine that it's all white. So they have to first see the importance and they have to want to do it. So I think that we have to start in areas. I think we have to start in areas that aren't that are at least conscious. Because you could have a white area that people are conscious of saying, okay, let's do something. So you have to start with the people who really want to do it first. You have to start recruiting. You have to start building relationships, and people have to be trained. People have to be trained because if people don't know how to talk to people who are different than them, you're going to get a bunch of people of color, and they're going to leave because they're going to be uncomfortable. So you have to be able to say, what do you need to do to make people comfortable? But we got to do something. And it's really crucial because if not, we're going to lose a whole lot of people because a lot of public school areas, like in the cities, a lot of them are mostly black and brown kids. So you have white teachers and they're not allowed to talk about racism. That's like weird.
Yeah. And it's funny that you bring that up, that in the inner cities, there are a lot of black and brown students, but the majority of those schools have white teachers, and so
Right.
for you not to be able to bring that up, that connection, that cultural connection is actually lost because there's a transfer of learning that happens between the teacher and the student, and then the student and the teacher. So I definitely agree with you on that point. It's not popular to be a diversity inclusion with the amount of expertise that you've had in this field. I know it got popular recently with George Floyd's death. A lot of companies started to look to
Yeah.
be a little bit more inclusive. What was your experience with? Did you see an uptick in that, or has it always been the same in your region of the country? How did that work out?
I don't really work so much. Well, sometimes I work I do work sometimes locally in my country. I mean, in my part of the country. But I got to say, COVID and after George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, all of that. After that, my phone didn't stop ringing all of a sudden. And a lot of it was like these white people who, like 6 months before, oh, we don't need you, blah, blah, blah. We got it all together. All of a sudden, yes, can you pay this amount of money? Okay. But we got really busy. And the other thing too was like a lot of my black friends were being called because they were like say they were in corporations and they were the only like black person that like a white person knew. So they go, oh, what should we do? One of my friends, Charmaine, said, I'm tired. She said, call Simma. Talk to Simma because I'm tired. Stop asking me. So that was really good. However, it's a year later or a little over a year later. Derek Chauvin is like in prison. So everybody goes, oh, justice has served. No, if justice was served, George Floyd wouldn't have been dead. Ahmaud Arbery wouldn't have been dead.
Yeah.
Elijah McClain would not have been murdered. But still, there's been now like the phone doesn't ring as much
Mhm.
in the same way because people think they have it together because maybe they have a Black Lives Matter poster in the hallway or something like that. The work you have to be willing to transform to have real change.
Yeah. And I know it's not just, I don't want to just keep it on black and white, but there was the Asian hate that happened as well,
Oh,
and I see that dying down as well. And I don't know if, and I'm not going to blame a corporation, but it seems as if that is dying down as well. Are you getting any inclusive areas or any inclusion information on that or any
yeah,
work?
I still have work. I'm still busy, but not like no, like I was like, oh no, not the phone again. Oh no, I mean not really. But
Yeah.
and the thing about anti-Asian hate, I've done a couple of shows on that. Like I had one show which was really good. I had a friend of mine who's African American who does a lot of work in diversity, and then I had a friend who's Chinese American who does a lot of work in diversity. And we had a real conversation. We had a Black Asian conversation,
Mm,
and they talked about like the stereotypes that they had each been raised with about the others. Because
wow.
we have to look at that. You can know about your group, but it's really important to know about other groups, and people need to be able to talk to each other. And anti-Asian hate, that's serious. That's still happening a lot around here where people are just like targeting Asian people to rob. That's real. And then the stuff with immigrants, with like Latinx people.
Yeah.
I mean, where Trump said, oh, they're all a bunch of rapists. But there's a lot of people who believe that. You hear all kinds of negative comments about still. And then you go to school, you go to the public school, and maybe your teacher is white who knows nothing about you, and then you're not acting the way that teacher wants you to act. So then all of a sudden, you're either diagnosed with a mental illness, or you're ignored, or you're left back, or you're considered like a slow learner. When we're losing a lot of geniuses, we are losing a lot of geniuses in these schools. And I think that it's a problem. And I know that there are groups like this group called Catalyst Ed. They work a lot with schools. So we need to have more of that. We need to have more people working in the schools and working to make the schools teach history and teach us to understand racism. I mean, we have a problem because I know in your part of the country and everywhere you have teachers who, I'm not saying all teachers, I'm just not
Yeah.
saying most.
Yeah. Not all teachers.
All you need is one teacher. All you need is two teachers who are white supremacists. Like, why are you teaching in the first place? Oh, you're teaching people how to join the Ku Klux Klan or something. Why are you there? And it is systemic. At the same time, we can't use that as an excuse not to do something. And education, that's where the leaders are. I talked to this guy, Orpheus Crutchfield, and what he does is he's African American, and he works at getting more teachers of color to teach in these top echelon private schools. And the reason he does that is he said because these schools are going to be turning out the future leaders of this country. So he wants them to be taught. We need to look at all schools like that, public schools. We're turning out the future leaders of the country, we're the future murderers of the country, whatever. But teachers play a really big role. And if you don't have the right kind of teachers, and if you don't have the right kind of curriculum, and you're making it illegal to talk about race in the classroom, I can't imagine what it would be like. Say you're one of like maybe 2 Black kids in this class, or 2 Asian kids in the class, or 2 whatever, and people are pretending that racism doesn't exist. How do you feel? What kind of self-esteem issues do you go through? What pressures do you feel to give up who you are? And how is that good for learning?
And I want to share it a little bit because I was thinking about when you were talking. One of the frustrating things I remember growing up, and I had great teachers who were not necessarily, my teachers were not racist, but I grew up in a predominantly Caucasian area. However, my school was, but actually, I grew up right outside of a historically Black university, which was strange. Okay, but anyway, so my teachers, when they taught the curriculum, when we started to talk about African Americans, we always started with slavery. And so, one of the most frustrating things for me was that we only started with slavery. And so, my heritage only started with slavery, whereas someone like you who is Jewish and you could talk about the Holocaust, you can go back even further to talk about ancient Israel and all the things that were built and all the things that were made. And we talked about other Europeans and how Greece and Rome and how they had all that history and all that culture. And to be in a classroom with very few Blacks and to be able to discuss where your historic came from, where your ancestry came from, that also was a learning curve for me to, as I grew, that I think it grew a small self-doubt issue because not knowing the history of how we contributed to America other than coming here and being slaves. Like the
Yeah, but
only
you raise a
reason
really good point, because you raise a really good point, because we didn't really talk about, there's the contributions like Charles Drew, Benjamin Banneker. I mean, just so many, Madam
many.
T.G. Rourke, so many. It just made me think about something, that if you just start with slavery, what about African history?
Yeah. Yeah. It's so much. It's a whole continent. They didn't know from which part of Africa we were from. And so that was a whole nother thing that was. And the crazy thing about being an assistant principal that I love living in my little Republican part of the country, I love them to death. The crazy part about it is the people that I work with are so inclusive that it's amazing. They took me around, and the man who started Juneteenth was a man by the name of Charlie Brown. And by the time Charlie Brown died, he was a millionaire. And what happened was he bought people's freedom and put white
Wow.
and Black people to work here in Texas in the community in which I live. And the principal would drive me around and show me just stuff that I did not know at all. Now, here I am. I grew up in Texas. Okay. I'm a Texan. I'm this, I'm that. And I'm African American. And this Caucasian man is driving me around showing me pieces of history that were so intertwined with Blacks and whites. That's a piece of culture that I wish I would have had growing up, but I had to get it as a principal. And then this, another thing that I love is that my school district makes it a point for students to know that there were Black and white people who worked together during that time. And they are really proud of Charlie Brown.
Wow.
Staunch Republicans are very proud of Charlie Brown. It's an eye-opening experience.
You don't have to be Black to understand Black history, to talk about it. I know white teachers that made it a point to talk about Black history in their school. In fact, my sister was white. She was teaching in I guess, a locked ward at the state hospital.
Okay.
And my sister would always talk about how anti-Semitic the people were in her, who she worked with. And for some reason, I don't know why, because the students were mostly all Black and brown, I thought that maybe my sister was not imagining things, but I thought that maybe like the teachers were all like people of color, because the students were, I don't know why I thought that. And I never said anything. I just thought, I said, oh, Bonnie, I think maybe you should look at it this way. Maybe you should go out to dinner with people, blah, blah. No, I'm not going out to dinner with those people, blah. And then one year she says, I'm going to do something this year for Black history. I said, I think that's great. She said, because the kids here really don't know anything about the history. She says, I want to know something about Black history, Puerto Rican history. I said, okay. And then she says to me, she says, I'm planning my curriculum. She says, and then people who are in the lunchroom say, what happened to white history? And my sister said, I just said to them, that's every day. And I said, and my sister was never like political or anything like that. She
Yeah.
just, and I said, really? I said, that's weird that all those black people said it. She says, black? None of them are black. She says, they're all, she says, don't you get it? She said, I've been trying to tell you, they're racist and anti-Semitic. I said, oh, I thought she
Yeah.
was just like not getting it right. And and the kids loved it. The kids loved it.
Yeah.
And she'd bring in like speakers. She'd bring in like black people who were like well known, not maybe well known to the white people in the school, well known to to people, and she'd bring
Yeah.
them in. So yeah, I know. I think it's important, but that we all have to have a sense of that. It's not really just for black people to know that. Everybody needs to know that, because especially white people, especially young white people, need to know that. They need to know how that what they benefit from, like traffic lights, like plasma, all of that. That just one's a bunch of white people. They need to know that they're benefiting from like the contributions of black people and anybody else who's not like from their particular group. Because or else I think, oh, it's just all white people who do this stuff.
Yeah, I think the more inclusive we are, the better. I think the newest front of inclusion is students of LGBTQ plus communities. And so that's something that is now more prevalent in schools that were not prevalent back in the day. And as far as diversity and inclusion of those individuals, how can school districts go about that so that that's done in a meaningful manner?
Yeah, that's hard because you really have to deal with a lot of homophobia. You have to deal with homophobia, you have to deal with transphobia. And that's another thing. You really have to change mindsets. That's why it's very important to have teachers that are LGBT. It used to be illegal. If you were LGBTQ, you were kicked out. I have a cousin who was a teacher, and for years she pretended that she wasn't gay. She didn't even tell me she was gay. It was obvious to me, but she wouldn't tell anybody. I said, why? She said, because I'll be fired. So that's good. At least I don't know about where you are, but here you can't be fired if you're LGBTQ, but
Yeah,
you
no.
used to be able to. And I think that it's the same thing. There has to be a lot of education. And what happens is when people get to know somebody who's LGBTQ and they see them like they're a person, that's when people start changing. But when people don't know anybody, then that's how they maintain all that homophobia. But then on the other hand, if it's dangerous to come out, then what are you going to do? And also trans kids right now,
Yeah.
issues
Yeah.
around trans kids. That's because you have people now, I think in your state and other places, trying to pass laws making it like illegal to have genderless bathrooms.
Yes. Yes, we've dealt with situations where that is an issue.
Information.
Students and gender neutral bathrooms in K-12 education. How can schools meet that diversity and inclusion measure with fidelity?
They have to be, first they have to stop teaching transphobia and homophobia in the schools.
Mm.
They have to make it comfortable for kids to be who they are. They have to be able to do things that to stop bullying, because these kids get bullied a lot.
Yes.
And they have to have that as part of the curriculum, just like anything else. Like if they need to have race, talk about race, but you also need to talk about sexual orientation. And the hard part is when you have teachers that co-sign that hate.
Yeah.
And that's what's hard. You have to pass laws, right? You have to have laws, you have to have policies, but you also have to transform people and transform the way that they think. And the way that they think is, and to do that, you need to have open discussions. You have to be willing to have those open discussions with people. And I'm sure a lot of LGBTQ parents are willing to have that discussion, and the kids, if they're able to, are able to have that discussion. But when you have school boards who are not willing to have that discussion, then it's difficult. Then you have to do a lot of work on the outside. You have to do a lot of work, and you have to really work with your kids to have a high sense of self-esteem.
Yeah, some of those students are very resilient anyway. It takes a lot of courage to make that statement in the first place, going against what a lot of people are going to make a judgment about. And I know it's something that I had to adjust to because I was not used to it. So I'm going to say that I'm transitioning myself into understanding. And what I've also noticed is that they are discriminated against just some of us were discriminated against, and you have to experience discrimination to know what that discrimination is. And though I think those kids have a really good understanding of it.
Yeah, although there's a lot of, like, if you look at a high rate of suicide, there's a high rate of suicide of transgender kids. And particularly if you're a black or brown transgender kid, because there's so much bullying and violence, and that's got to be stopped. But when you have like law people in the laws go, there's nothing that we can do about that. You're just co-signing the violence. Because I've known kids that were like kicked out of their houses because they were trans or because they were gay, and luckily they, like, a teacher took them in or somebody else in the community took them in. But kids who have nobody, those are the kids that end up homeless a lot.
Yeah.
Those are the kids like you see on the street a lot.
Yeah. And then they have to do things. It brings up other behaviors. They have to do things in order to survive. And
That's
that's not
right.
fair as well. That it almost puts you, well, I am 100% against poverty. And so
I am
anytime
too.
you can put a student in a impoverished situation, they're going to make decisions, whether they be homosexual or heterosexual, that are going to cause detriment to their well-being.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot of work that has to be done, but we each have to do what we can. We each have, because you have to have small actions could create big change, and
Mhm.
small actions could actually snowball and become like big change. I know people who are homophobic until they met some people who were gay, and they completely changed because they hadn't known anybody before. They just had like there's assumptions about who people are. Now we have some trans people who are like very famous.
Yeah.
That's a good thing. I'm not talking about Caitlyn Jenner, but she's, I don't know, but other people who are famous. And so people can have like role models, because
Yeah.
everybody needs a role model. If you're a young kid of color and you don't have any role models, say that luckily there are a lot, but say you don't have any role models, or
Yeah.
and all you're hearing is negative things about you, about who you are,
Yeah.
then you're going to act out. You're going to get depressed.
Yeah.
Turn to drugs, alcohol. You might become violent against somebody because or violence against yourself, but you're not going to be able to adjust because you're only hearing negative things. So who am I? Where am I supposed to go? What good
Mhm.
am I? You don't try. It's the same thing with LGBTQ kids. You just hear that all the time, negative. And that's why role models are important. And it's also important that these role models come into some of these schools and come in and talk to people, which I'm always so glad when that happens.
Yes, me too. We need as many as we can. And especially there's a lot going on in schools right now. There's this new TikTok challenge where they're challenging kids to destroy and vandalize bathrooms. That was
What
last
is
month.
that? I mean, I'm on
Yeah.
TikTok, but what is, I mean,
So TikTok
that's
got a
crazy.
lot of teachers got TikTok to take that down. And so
Oh, good.
TikTok took that down. However, it's still a challenge because people are still doing it and posting on other social media sites. And then the newest TikTok's challenge in that same vein, because there are 12 different challenges for schools this whole year. The next one is to hit a teacher on their behind and see if you can get away with it. Yeah, that's the kind of stuff that they're doing now.
I mean,
So that's sexual assault
that's
down here
crazy.
in Texas.
That's because there was that challenge. I think it was, I can't remember what social media, about Zoom bombing.
Yep. Zoom bombing.
And I've been on meetings, it happened 2 or 3 times, where people come on and make racist statements. And they were doing that like like schools where there's a lot of young black kids that were
Yeah.
doing like distant learning. And I was on one where somebody started pulling their pants down.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm thinking, you must not have a life. You must be unhappy and you must be really desperate. But on
Really.
the other hand, you need to be punished for that. There needs to be consequences, in my
Yeah.
opinion.
Yeah.
But
Ye-
yeah, that's dangerous. So that hitting a teacher,
Yeah. That's the newest challenge. And so there are a lot of the latest thing on TikTok now, teachers are responding to that particular portion of the challenge. That if you hit me, I'm going to press charges. If you hit me, some teachers are saying I'm not the one. I'm gonna hit you back. It's unfortunate that we got to go there, but I didn't want to take the conversation there. But that's what's going on right now. So, Simma, where can our listeners find you?
where you can go to my podcast, which is www.raceconvo, like conversation, www.raceconvo.com. You can find me on Twitter at The Inclusionist, because that's my brand, The Inclusionist. So at The Inclusionist. I'm on LinkedIn, Simma Lieberman, and I'm on Instagram, Simma.Lieberman. Just use
Excellent.
my name.
Excellent. I love your the inclusionist. I would steal that if it wasn't trademarked, but I'm telling you, I love it. I love it. That's so, and inclusion is, so I'm about to go, and that we're gonna wrap this up. But what is the definition? What is your definition of an inclusionist?
An inclusionist is somebody who, like, for me, it's my life is dedicated to creating cultures of inclusion wherever I go. So I work with leaders and organizations to look at what can they do to practice inclusive behavior at all times. And also, how do they transform their mind? How do they think like an inclusionist? How do they think so that it's not just, oh, okay, now I'm supposed to go say hello to everybody. No, inside you, it's an inside to the outside that you know what you need, that you want to learn, and what you need to do to be inclusive, to make people feel comfortable. Because when people feel most comfortable, if they feel comfortable and included in school, they're going to do their best work.
Mm.
If they feel included and comfortable like they belong in corporations, they're going to do their best work. And if they feel included in their community, they're going to show up.
Wow, you're amazing. I feel included in this conversation. So thank you very much for coming on the show. I really appreciate you. And hopefully this won't be our last talk.
Oh, no, definitely not our last talk. I'm serious.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.